Hey, Chris here from The Chris Stefanik Show, where we talk about how to live out God's plan for you each and every day in your everyday life in a way that makes you more alive and more joyful. Check it out. No, it's fun to think about the Lord working in miraculous ways where He just comes and instantly makes everything better. Usually not how He works, right? But it's easy to find God there. I mean, it's just obvious, right? That's why it's such a powerful story, and God gives us those every once in a while. It's not so fun to think about how He usually invites people to encounter Him by leaning into their brokenness. Mm-hmm. And so you encounter the Lord through a healing, but you also, the Lord's brought you to deep, profound intimacy with Himself through pain. And I'll try along with you not to cry too much getting through this story of yours. But share with us that story of your pain and the abuse you lived through. And before you do that, I just want to thank you ahead of time, because most men who suffer from sexual abuse, there's a cloud of shame that keeps them from ever talking about it. Because they think, well, I shouldn't have suffered from that, or whatever it is. That keeps it secret, you know. So thanks for being courageous. But tell us your story.
Well, and I think just a context for this that I think is powerful is we have a number of scripture references in the Gospels where Jesus healed somebody, a paralytic or a blind man, or and one of the first things He says to him is, don't go and tell anybody about this.
Yeah, which never made any sense to me.
Right. So you look at that and you're like, why would he ever say that to somebody? Like, isn't this what He's all about? Right? Like, He's trying to grow His ministry.
And does He actually expect them not to tell anybody?
Yeah. So what is that direction all about? And it's kind of funny. I look back on our life, and if I could change one thing about my dad's healing, it would be for at least a couple of years after he was healed to assimilate the healing into every other area of his life, particularly our family.
Wow.
So my dad's miraculously healed and turns into an overnight sensation.
Wow.
And literally is being flown all over the world to tell his story.
But needing to work on the
And
interior.
I went from being a 9-year-old kid who for the entire 9 years of my life, he was not there.
Wow.
To being a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, and he's not there.
Wow.
You see what I'm saying?
Oh yeah. Could have had a breather in between.
And everything in me as a 7, 8-year-old kid, and particularly when we started having our conversion experience through my mom, my prayer for my dad's healing actually wasn't about my dad being healed.
Wow.
It was about my dad being restored to our family. I wanted a dad.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And that really, in some ways, isn't what fully happened. You know. So, as I've grown, and I didn't know that there was sexual abuse in my background until I got married.
You didn't know?
No.
You don't.
I mean, I knew that there was. I knew there was a lot of confusion around some things in me, particularly around relationships and intimacy. But I was a virgin when I got married at the age of 30.
Wow.
And you know, I was very proud of that. Like in youth ministry days, you know, like that was a big story that I could tell. Right, was how I had saved myself for marriage, and I would talk about chastity, and I was, you know, already beginning to speak at Steubenville conferences before I met Meg, and I would love to do the men's session and to talk about this, you know, what an important area this is in our life and stuff. But really unaware of all of this tragic brokenness in my past. But then we get married and we go on our honeymoon. The first night of our honeymoon, it became really clear, like, okay, something is not right here.
And you couldn't put your finger on what the it was.
No, but I was having images come into my mind, and smells, and
oh, brother.
you know, just obviously don't need to go into graphic details, but
sorry,
it destroyed the first several nights of the honeymoon, because it just brought all kinds of confusion about what is happening.
All the pain
here.
and poor Meg,
and really
too.
even on the honeymoon, like, I never really fully understood. I don't think it wasn't until I got back home and started seeing a counselor and a spiritual director. And
you know, within my own marriage, I'm going to have Natalie on to talk about this again. It took us 10 years to realize, oh, she had been sexually abused as a kid.
Oh, wow.
And that's why so many things have been off for 10 years that I didn't even realize were off, because it's so hard to look at pain.
Yeah.
It's on some level easier to pretend it's not there and to let it just eat at your life in a million ways that you're not even aware of.
Right.
Wow. So this came out, and this is what love does, right? Two people get close enough, and then you can't hide the wound anymore.
Well, yeah. And where do wounds get stored in us, in our memory? It's in our heart.
Yeah.
And when the love of Christ and the love of another gets into your heart, it starts expanding your heart.
Yeah.
And then it just bumps into those wounded areas in a way that's very natural and organic, you know.
What, as you started to unpack this through the years, what impact did you see clearly that wound had on you, that the sexual abuse had on you? You know, what are the wounds it inflicted on you? You talk about three particular wounds.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, in some ways, I have greater clarity now, years later, because I almost feel like this happened in 2 or 3 stages. I don't know how else to describe it, because I had, you know, when we got back from the honeymoon, and I went to some counseling and some spiritual direction during that time, and realized, okay, I clearly have had something that happened, and the more that I leaned into all of that, I started having more memories, and it all started, you know, coming in a way that I could remember it all and what had happened. And
so trauma's got, your brain's got an amazing way of dealing with trauma.
yeah,
Like you literally didn't even remember it.
oh, it's definitely repressed in me.
That's incredible.
Yeah, from an 8-year-old experience, and it was just in my unique situation. It was had multiple layers of complexity, because it was right during the time that my sister died, who was really one of my best friends, and she died. My mom had a nervous breakdown, went into a nursing or went into a mental hospital for a period of time, and all of us kids were sent to various relatives. And so, you know, as an 8-year-old kid, it was just this really very upsetting, traumatizing experience of being picked up from school by an aunt that I wasn't really close with and didn't know that well, taken home, a bag packed, taken to an airport and sent to a relative's house in another state for months, right? And this was just days after we had just been at the funeral for my sister. And it was on that several month period of time is when this abuse happened. So I was just uniquely vulnerable, and so many layers of complexity for me, you know, that it was very, very traumatic, I think. I think initially I had some huge healing around knowing that I was abused, realizing who did it, coming to some grips with how do I deal with that? How do I come to a place of forgiving that? And like you said, it was probably a 8 to 10 year experience of unpacking that and really coming to some healing from the event.
Yeah.
What have found beautiful, mysterious, but incredibly painful again, is to realize that there was all kinds of effects of that in my life, in relationships and in my emotional makeup that I didn't understand. So, you know, it's kind of like, I think, the way the church looks at sin and confession.
Yeah.
That it's one thing to confess a sin and even be forgiven.
Yeah.
It's a totally other thing to make amends.
Right.
To make up for the damage that's been done because of the sin, which sometimes you can't. How could you ever make up for the damage? Like, you know, some damage, right? So this has been something that's been happening over the last couple of years that I've...
Man, wasn't that great? Listen, if you don't want to be happy, be sure not to subscribe. But if you want a more joyful life, the kind of life that God created you for, the kind of life Jesus promised when he said, I came to give you life to the full, then make sure you hit subscribe and share this channel with everybody you know.